Good question. Is this data publicly available now?
You can register the account from this website. So, okay.
Okay, thank you.
All the data was storage in our CWB. You can register account.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next talk will be Billy Galata, an architecture study for a U.S. government radio occultation backbone.
Okay, so as you probably have noticed, what Natalie just said, the title of my talk is, and the title you see up here is a little bit different. When I submitted the abstract originally, we had only completed the initial backbone study, and it's now expanded into some more large-scale architecture studies. So we actually have a little bit more data here to go over. Okay, so go over background, some of our results from both studies, and then go over risk conclusions, recommendations we have coming out of the study so far. Okay, so for some background. These studies initially kicked off late last year. We did a reliability analysis on Cosmic 2, which showed that we might start losing spacecraft in about the 2027 timeframe. So we started some discussions with GNSS-SAE at the time to say, hey, there's no plans for US government-based RO post-Cosmic 2. We don't think there's any direct replacement from any source coming up. Maybe we should take a look at what some possibilities are to cover the US government in the future. So we kicked off this study late last year, initially as a sort of top-level backbone study for the US government RO. And after that study completed, we moved into this analysis of alternatives. So there's a couple differences between these studies. So first, on the backbone side, really our goal was to take a look at, when you look at RO and the needs of GNSS, the requirements they have, how do you meet that with ignoring everything else around you? How do you optimize an architecture to have essentially your minimal system to meet your needs? From that, we grew into the analysis of alternatives. So now, what do you have in reality? And how do you fill the gaps that you have between your ideal RO system and what reality is moving forward? So like I said, this study kicked off late last year. We just finished the AOA first part, so part 2A there in the timeline, back in August. And then the second part is going to kick off, I think, in November and go through about July of 2025. So the framework for both these studies are pretty similar. So it initially kicked off with some modeling of the RO. So we did simulations of many orbits we'll go over of spacecraft and what the resultant RO results from there are. The backbone in the AOA had some slight differences. The backbone was only a sort of 1-month simulation using real ephemeris. The AOA was over a year. And on the backbone, we looked at a couple of reference architectures to get sort of a baseline idea of what you get, and then moved into a full optimization using some tools from aerospace. And we also took a look at some data latency for our space weather products. In terms of the AOA, it was a 1-year simulation. We used idealized ephemeris for the GNSS constellations. And then we took a look at the existing and planned missions coming up for the partners that NOAA has. And then we looked at about 100 different architectures of different solutions you might have to meet your needs. In terms of evaluation, again, both very similar, looking at neutral atmosphere count on both sides, neutral atmosphere refresh. The backbone took a little bit deeper look into some space weather products with TEC, and then also took a look at some local time gaps. And then, so in terms of requirements, again, also very similar between the two studies. So initially we started off with an 8,000 daily count requirement for the backbone, moved that to 6,000 for the AOA. And then the AOA also took a look at the distribution between the tropics, mid-latitudes, and polar regions, and both had a 6-hour refresh requirement, which is we're going to get to here in a little bit. Okay, so the backbone results. So looking at the 3 reference architectures, we had a 4, 8, and 12 spacecraft constellation that we looked at. The first was very similar to Cosmic 2, just with 4 spacecraft. So you have a 24-degree inclined constellation at Leo. I think it was 550 kilometers. Second one was very similar to Cosmic 2 A and B. So you have the 4 low inclination spacecraft and 4 higher inclination spacecraft. And the final architecture was the previous architectures plus a mid-plane at 48 degrees. So like I said before, we did simulations for neutral atmosphere occultation, CC tracks, and observational latency. So the results we came up with from this, basically, you can meet your count requirement with current payload capabilities without 4 spacecraft or more. So essentially, you get 2,000 occultations per day. So for your 8,000 count, 4 is all you need. When you get to your refresh requirement, you can meet it in the tropics with 4 spacecraft, but you need at least 8 spacecraft constellation to meet that requirement globally. The TEC results were extremely similar to the neutral atmosphere. And then you can easily achieve that space weather data need of 30-minute median latency using mostly commercial ground stations, but also if you have something fairly similar to the Cosmic 2 downlink system with some polar assistance. So the conclusion here that we came up with just from these reference architectures is that the global refresh requirement drives your system design way more than your counts. It's much harder to meet that global refresh on a 500 by 500 kilometer grid cell than it is to meet just a straight number of counts per day from across your system. And you can meet your requirements with 4/8 spacecraft, but real world losses, things like GNSS spacecraft not operating or not transmitting would likely lead to the requirements failure. You probably need a spacecraft or two more in each of your inclination planes. So after we did those reference architectures, we got some support from aerospace to run a full optimization. So we generated a trade space using all the requirements that I've gone over previously, and then a couple of different other objectives. So we had the GNSS-R requirements like I went over, but we capped it at 12 spacecraft maximum and 3 orbit planes maximum with a maximum inclination to about sun synchronous, and then with a minimum altitude of 500 kilometers. So we ran about a little over 1 million architectures. A few over 50,000 optimized architectures was fine, but of those, we ended up with 171 that met all of the requirements we set for the study. So similarly to the reference architectures, refresh drives the solution, not the count. So if you look at the plot on the right here, okay. So if you look at the plot at the right, that dashed line shows you for your minimum, for the minimum number of counts that you get from any architecture in that solution that meets all of the objectives and requirements that NOAA has, you're actually about 15,000. So you're almost double the daily count requirement to meet that refresh. So refresh is really important from a systems and architecture design standpoint. You need 8 spacecraft. You can't get around that for refresh. And we still have 171 architectures. This was a fairly limited scope in terms of what our requirements on the architectures were. So there's still a huge trade space here with lots of other potential solutions and refinement that we can do to either narrow that down or expand it to potential additional solutions moving forward. Okay, onto the analysis of alternatives. So like I said, this was to take that optimized set and then move more now into reality. So what do you have coming up? So the way we baselined this, we call this the NOAA baseline system. So we have Cosmic 2, we have a graceful degradation, which we use based on the results we got from a reliability study last year, which we're expecting to last out to about 2037. So then we have PAWS, which ends in 2028, the METOPS, and then Sentinel-6A and B. So basically all of the partner missions here, they're based on their published dates of launch and their our best estimates of their mission extension and mission lifetimes. We also modeled commercial data, but we did not use real world ephemeris for the commercial data. We idealized commercial provisions based on their historical launches and historical capabilities. And then we took a look at the gaps in this system for the RO for count and refresh. Like I said, there was a global requirement, and then we had requirements in different latitude bands between tropics, mid-latitudes, and then polar. Okay, so what gaps did we find? So the plots on the right there are plots of refresh. The black line is the important one for the requirement, which is the global refresh. And we defined refresh as the percentage of cells on a 500 by 500 kilometer grid that were filled every 6 hours. So there were some pretty big gaps there. In counts, no gaps. Like I said, you only need 4 spacecraft with modern sensors to be able to achieve 6,000 counts per day. Very easily achievable with the partners, especially with partners plus commercial data purchases. So the global refresh count actually is not currently met. We do meet it in the tropics. You can see over there on the left-hand side of the top plot. Cosmic 2 was designed with this requirement in mind, and so we have that capability in the tropics, but not globally. And also the uniform distribution requirements NOAA has, which I haven't gone over here, but that's also not met. So as you can see from the plots, this system is really sensitive to the loss of Cosmic 2. So basically, once you've lost 3 Cosmic 2 spacecraft, you cannot make up for with any existing data, both for METOPS or an entire commercial data purchase of all commercial data available. You can't make up for that loss by 2031. At the current levels of NOAA's data purchases, you actually end up in requirements failure after the loss of 2 Cosmic 2 spacecraft in 2029. So basically nothing that's planned right now from the US side and from the international partners the US has can compensate for the loss of Cosmic 2. Increasing the amount of commercial data you purchase does drastically help improve the performance, but still, again, it just doesn't replace the capability that Cosmic 2 provides. And a large part of that is this last gap here, which is a lack of diversity in the sun synchronous orbit local times. So basically, due to ride shares, we see that there's a very large oversaturation of RO data in basically in the morning and early afternoon orbits around MEDOP and around the JPSS orbit. Okay, so now that we know the gaps, looking at some ways to fill those gaps. So we looked at having a notional launch in 2029 of say, a US government backbone from NOAA. And with that, we combined that with some other alternatives, including international partners, which we've already seen, and then varying amounts of commercial data purchases. So what we discovered, and this shouldn't be shocking to anyone, that you need a dedicated and coordinated mission to meet the refresh requirements that NOAA has. So like I said in the previous slide, but again, worth stating again, there's no existing or planned missions that can replace Cosmic 2's capability. So you need a new low inclination mission with coordinated diverse orbits. So similar to Cosmic 2, you need well distributed through all local times or all RAN planes. And the same thing we actually need from the high inclination orbits. Like I said previously, we have an oversaturation in the basically the early morning or the morning plane and the early afternoon. And without better coordination to split up the sun synchronous planes, you actually still can struggle to meet the requirement. So this is not the end. This is where we are so far. We do have a couple of different alternatives that we're examining in the next phase of the study. So we're going to do some concurrent design of our architectures, which will include, government backbone similar to this and an optimization. These are all sort of notional ones we came up with by hand, which we thought could meet the requirements, and some did. We'd like to take a look at, performing an optimization similar to the first phase. That'll give us a better answer of exactly what you need at a minimum to launch to get to where NOAA's requirements are. We'd also like to take a look moving forward at space weather products, TEC, similar to the first one, but we actually have some ideas for examining scintillation capabilities of the constellations, and that is a direction we would like to go. As a part of this, we also took a look at the risks that are associated with NOAA's existing system and where it's moving in the future. So I think our biggest risk right now is data availability and distribution, right? The Cosmic 2 reliability study was pretty limited in scope just from a lack of data that we have. And we use the sort of mid-line prediction of a graceful degradation every 2 years of spacecraft. But in reality, that's probably unlikely, and those spacecraft may very well fail sooner than we've predicted. So there's a pretty high risk there of Cosmic 2 not exactly having the lifetime we expect. The partner and commercial missions have limited orbital distribution. Again, we have a lot of launches into the 9 o'clock to 11 o'clock and 1300 to 1400 orbital planes. So you get pretty bad distribution for local time, and you actually do see issues with your global refresh when you have so many spacecraft in such a small area on orbit. So this risk is assessed right now as a high risk to the system. There's also a schedule risk here. So like I said, Cosmic 2 has high uncertainty in terms of when it will actually start failing and how long it will launch. But the soonest NOAA could potentially launch a mission we've discussed is about 2031. So if you do have failure in 2029 and potentially early failures, you actually could be in a spot where you have a pretty large gap with no Cosmic 2 before NOAA has the capability to launch. So right now that risk is assessed as medium. Okay, so big takeaways. I think the biggest one we found in both studies is a minimum of 8 spacecraft are required to meet NESSIS's needs. So I just want to state for the record that these spacecraft can come from many sources. It doesn't have to be US government backbone. It can come from a government backbone, commercial, and partner missions. So total occultations per day are what I would call a non-optimal indication of RO performance. For designing an RO system, global refresh is actually your main driver. So while total occultations are a good back of the envelope indicator, maybe, I would recommend actually the community focuses on refresh when they're advocating for observational needs to government and partners. And from that, NESSIS distribution and refresh cannot be met by the partners that are planned and upcoming and commercial missions alone. The RO enterprise is extremely sensitive to the loss of Cosmic 2. So future RO missions should coordinate on orbit diversifications. Like I said, we've hammered on this quite a bit here in this talk. We have an oversaturation of data in the morning and early afternoon orbits. We should really work as a community to coordinate getting those spacecraft distributed to better orbits, both in low inclination and at high inclination, including the sun synchronous orbits. And finally, like I said before, our architecture studies are ongoing. We're going to hopefully be able to make our final recommendations to NOAA in July of 2025. And that is all. Any questions?
We have time for a few questions.
I'm Jonathan Brandmeier from Planet IQ. Just like to make the point that the entire worldwide market for commercial RO data is saturated by 2 Planet IQ satellites. That's not even counting our competitors out there. What is the government? And we are only limited in our deployment capability and our ability to diversify in orbits by government demand. What is NOAA doing to reach out to us for future planning? Right, you guys said no possible commercial entity could be ready by 2031. We disagree.
No, that was no government launch could be procured by until 2031
Correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
for government backbones.
government launch, not a commercial launch.
But yeah, no, I think that question is more for you than for me.
So I'll give a little talk about reiterating some of this, what Billy gave today, my talk's tomorrow. But we just received results from these studies, and we do want to reach out to the community about refresh and helping with that issue on the commercial side. We do have a community day coming up for NOAA, so I'll put a plug in for that too at the end of September. And yeah, you're welcome to reach out to us further about it.
And Jonathan, I also want to mention, I don't have your email, so I didn't invite you, but I did invite Rob. We're having a small side lunch session about the AOA study tomorrow. So if you meet up with me afterwards, I can get you invited over that so we can have more discussion to that end.
Yeah, I think this is a very important study, and especially when we talk to CGMS, this is always a long-term process, right? We have been asking for 20,000 profiles. At some time they accept it, then we say, okay, local time coverage and distribution is also important. Then finally they adopted this, and now I've learned that refresh is also equally important. So your results would be very nice to be presented to the CGMS working group too. So we will come back to you to ask for some nice slides.
Yeah, we'd be happy to provide them. Right, Natalie? I'm good to.
Yeah, again, this is Ben Ho from NOAA. I think this is very interesting, and I think it's keep on going. But I think I want to also point out the according to current analysis of the ROMAX data, it's look like it's not all the RO receiver have the same quality. So when we talk about backbone, we have a 2 way to talk about backbone. One, I think from your perspective is the climate perspective, that you have the uniform coverage, 6-hour forecast for, 6 hours for certain grid. But another way to think about backbone actually is a very good RO receiver in the specific height, don't drift, and have a very solid quality, have very solid processing, consistent processing, and then can be as a reference by others, which actually is very, very important. So in that point of view, because in the future, there's going to be a lot of different receivers from all kind of vendors, from all kind of country even, right? Coverage, BEDO, or even more. Then again, when we think about so-called backbone, this term, maybe NOAA should redefine what is the best backbone. And for me, I think I really appreciate the meta gross data for the past multiple decades, really using the same receiver at the similar height with whatever monitoring of the quality. So again, I think this is very interesting, but we need to define, again, the definition of a backbone is you want to have a little bit more like climate type, uniform coverage, or you want to have a solid quality for long-term reference, small set, but very, very high quality at the specific altitude.
Yeah, so Ben, I will say, we did actually look a little bit at payloads and such on this study, and it is planned on part of that concurrent design to take into, things of that nature. We just haven't, I didn't talk about the payload stuff here yet. So that's in our mind. It just wasn't part of this. Yeah.
We're probably out of time. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry.
We can talk after, Tony.
Thank you all. Thank you, Billy. I think I'll turn it over to Jan.
All right. Well, thank you to all the speakers from this morning. We had a fascinating keynote and very interesting talk so far. So lunch is out here in the main area. There are some tables inside here. There's also an outside seating area if you go out the doors that most of you came in through. And if you like to, there are also some seats upstairs. So there's stairwells to the right and left of the elevator, or you can take the elevator. Lunch, because we are limited in time today, is a kind of a self-contained